I think of humanity as a team, and I feel like for a few thousand years now, we've only been playing with half of our team, and the other half has been sitting on the bench. So to me, feminism is all about rallying to support those that have been sitting on the bench, which is mostly the female half of our team, and getting the whole team to realize what a benefit it is for us all if we're all playing to our fullest potential.
Hello, you guys. Welcome back. You are listening to Let It Out with me, your host, Katie Delbout. And I also wrote a book by the same name. If you're new, it's called Let It Out. It's available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, wherever you shop. Anyway, I record this podcast and it comes out every single Wednesday. I talk to inspiring people, creative people, fascinating people, interesting people. And today's guest is all of those things. Her name is Anea. Beautiful name, beautiful person. I got to spend a lot of time with her a couple months ago when I was in LA, and just recorded this conversation a couple weeks ago. And I sat at my computer just now listening back to her wisdom, and I just love being in her presence. And this you will get a sense of once you get listening to this podcast. It's a very meandering conversation as usual. We talk about parenting. We talk about her organization that she started, REALGirl, which I love, what it is, what it does. We talk about, her career and her story and her advice on relationships, her advice for teachers and parents. She hosts a parenting podcast called Rad Parenting, which is rad, and I loved, which we mentioned in this podcast. Even though I'm not a parent, I listened to an episode and found so much value in it. It's a great episode. As usual, if you like the show, share it. Share it with a friend, share it with a family member, share it with anyone you think it would help. It helps grow the show. You know what? Listen, you guys, we in our category, which is society and culture, if you're curious, last week I checked my phone, and guess what? We were number 121. How cool is that? It only goes up to 150 on my phone. But you know what? The Let It Out podcast, this little thing I record from my bedroom, it was up there. It was number 121. So if you want to help grow the show, if you want us to stay 121, because when I looked later, we were higher up. But anyway, still good news that we're still in the top 200. Maybe if we all leave reviews and we all subscribe, because that's the algorithm, right? Like we all got to subscribe and get our friends to subscribe. It's like giving the podcast a high five. But maybe if we all do that and we all leave a review and get a friend to leave a review, maybe we'll be, 119 next week. Or, maybe we'll be number 7 someday. Who knows? It would be really cool. It helps me grow the show. It helps me get some really great sponsors so I can keep doing the show and doing the show better and doing the show more and doing more live episodes and getting really awesome, cool, fascinating, interesting, creative guests on the podcast. So if you have someone that you want me to have a conversation with, shoot me an email. There's a way to do that on the website. You can just suggest a guest. Actually, speaking of the website, amazing podcast producer extraordinaire, Amanda, she made a whole new donate page on the website. It's so much less complicated than the last donate page that I hobbled together. She made one that's so user-friendly, so if you want to support the show that way, you can always donate, and Amanda made it a lot easier to be able to do so. So I hope you guys are having an amazing day whenever you're listening to this. Enjoy my conversation with Anea, and I will talk to you guys at the end of the episode. Well, thank you so much for doing the podcast. I really have wanted to have you on since I had Val on several episodes, and I've been so eager to get you on the podcast and talk more about you and your story, and of course, Real Girl, and how we can stop screwing up our girls. And you're, like I said, you're one of in the intro to this that I record before, but you're one of the smartest, coolest role models I have in my life. And I'm so glad that I met you and I got to spend some time with you, like we were saying before, when I was in LA a couple months ago. And I'm just so excited to share you and your work with my audience. So thank you so much for being here.
My absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yay. So I guess I wanted to start by introducing you to everyone. Tell us the inception of Real Girl. How did it begin? And I know your story is very weaved into that. So let's just go ahead and start there.
Okay, sure. So when I was in grad school, this is really the where it began specifically with Real Girl. When I was in grad school and I was doing research, I came across a study out of NYU that said that the average girl's self-esteem peaks at the age of 9 and then plummets. And that in itself took my breath away. Yeah. But what magnified it for me was really two things. The first was that at the time I was already, had a private practice working with both girls and women. My oldest client was like 59, I think. And as I thought about that data, I thought, oh my gosh, I think what I also know that's not being stated here is that not only does it plummet, it rarely, if ever, returns to those 9 and under levels, because I was consistently working with women who were coming to me and saying, I don't know how to feel worthwhile. I'm constantly feeling not good enough, whether it's professionally or personally or, whatever. And then the real kicker was that I realized it was my own story. And that's sort of where we can go there whenever you want. But when my own personal history really started to play a significant role, I think I'd always been determined to make a difference in this realm of like supporting girls and women. But when I came across that stat and I realized, oh my gosh, like this is my story too. So it started from there. And so then when I was in grad school, we had to do it was like a community project, like come up with a way that you can take this expensive degree and theoretically, make a difference in the world or do something for your community. And so I drew up this little blueprint for what I envisioned as an attempt to address the issues that around this whole self-esteem thing, but that would have a really deep and lasting impact. So while there were lots of great girls organizations out there, and there still are, that are doing important work, I felt like, what would we need to do to really get to the root of the problem, to not just sort of play on the surface? We were, 3 waves of the women's movement, and still girls and women plagued with this feeling of not good enough. How could I get to the heart of the issue and still have this like fun, dynamic experience for girls that would really be transformative? And that's really where it began. I presented it to my cohort, and they thought it was great. We piloted it, in January of 2011 to a really interesting, diverse group of girls, and it's just grown from there.
That's so amazing. And I want to go back a bit to pick up on something that you said, and I eventually want to get more into Real Girl and what it does and how it works. And obviously, that I know a lot about that because I did the instructor training with you. But I want everyone else to hear about that. But first, I want to go back to, you mentioned when you were coming up with Real Girl and the idea that, like it often does with us, we use our own experience and our own story to create our work. So you mentioned that you realized that there was something within your story and your past that needed to be addressed. So let's go back a bit with your story and what were you doing before you went to grad school, and tell us a bit about your relationship to yourself and your femininity and feminism growing up and when you were younger, and how you got to the grad school program that you went through and what that was.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so let's, I mean, what I guess what I should say is that my grad school program was one of only two that exist in the country. And it was an actual master's degree in women's spirituality, which differs from a women's studies program in that it has a lot of the components of a women's studies program, but it focuses more, it had a strong sort of psychological, particularly transpersonal psychological component. But even more importantly was that it really got to the root of exploring how does spirituality factor into the way that we collectively make meaning or derive meaning in the world, and how have women been left out of that construction over the last, few thousand years, and how was it before, and how do we find our way back to that, which is a really important part of not only our own personal healing, but then how we go forward in terms of participating with the construction of our reality and creating meaning and so on. So that's where I ended up, if you want to sort of go there. And then where I started was when I discovered this stat about girls' self-esteem peaking, and I thought back to my own history. So I grew up with a very sort of better than average in terms of stability. My parents are still happily married today, which I don't think a lot of it, for now 51 years. And when I say happily, I mean they actually still really like each other. They're not just sort of, we got another year under our belt, which I think is an important distinction.
Yeah.
So I grew up in this, on the prairies in Canada, rural upbringing, really down to earth parents. In the prairies in Canada, for anybody who doesn't know, is very similar to like growing up in the Midwest. So if you know anyone from the Midwest, it's a very similar sort of dynamic and personality and interaction and values. Yeah, exactly. And so I would say, like, my memory right up until I hit puberty was really feeling invincible. Like I could do anything, like I could be anything. In fourth grade, which is when it would have been really peaking, I was writing, directing, and acting in plays for my entire school, charging a small admission fee to raise money for our fifth grade camping trip, and just not overthinking what I wore in the morning and how I looked and all of that. I just really felt like I was very connected to my world and capable of whatever I set my mind to. And then as I entered adolescence in earnest, let's call it, like, most people don't know that, girls start to enter adolescence around 7 or 8 years old. But I mean, puberty, like real signs of like, my body's changing and boys really sort of matter now. When I started to move into that phase of my development, things changed very quickly. And I moved from, I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to this, I moved away from being the driving force in my sort of day-to-day life and experience, to having second and third guessing everything that I wore, everything I said. I mean, it still makes me emotional to think about it because it's painful for me to think about that movement away from myself. And by the time I was 16, I entered my first serious relationship. I had my first real boyfriend, and I ended up in that relationship for probably a little more than 4 years. And at its worst, it had become emotionally, psychologically, and physically abusive. And it took me a while because that didn't just happen at the end. And then I was like, I'm out of here. Like, you can't treat me like that. I wish that had been the story, but it wasn't. The story was that probably happened, slowly. It moved toward that. At about the 2-year mark, it got really bad, and I stuck around for, another 2 years after that. And anybody who's been in an abusive relationship knows that, every incident, and often it does begin with like, verbal abuse or, some form of emotional abuse or psychological abuse, things that are a little bit harder to put our fingers on. And so that by the time the physical abuse is happening, you're already so far gone in terms of believing that you are worthy of having anything more, that you would be lovable to any other man, that it's not just such an easy thing to pick up and go. So when I did get out of that relationship, which I'm thankful for, and not to say that I trust my story and my path, and there's so much I learned from it. And I think it was part of the journey that I was supposed to take and the work that I'm now doing in the world. But when I got out of that relationship, I was determined, to understand how that invincible little 9-year-old ended up in such a destructive, harmful relationship. And 2, because I saw it happening around me as well. I wasn't the only person that I knew that had been in this kind of relationship. I thought, I need to understand how this happens. So it sort of became my mission. I worked with, girls at risk right out of high school when I was in college in summer programs. And then I came out of high school and went right into the classroom. I was really passionate about, being able to affect change in that context. And by the time I moved from Canada to California, to the States, and started teaching high school, which was my first long-term full-time teaching job, I started to consistently see girls who I knew were functioning well beneath their potential.
This women's spirituality program, that sounds so fascinating. What was your relationship to spirituality? And you addressed a bit about your experience with growing up and your self-esteem, but how did you decide, how did you find that program, and how did you decide to go through it? What was your experience like teaching high school that led you to that eventually?
Well, I think, there was a step in between, and the step in between was that, as I kept digging deeper with my own, because this is what we do, right? It's like healing a wound, and the wound is so deep that we have to keep peeling off layers. And in my quest to understand how I had gotten there, and also I think I need to say because I looked around how collectively we had gotten to where we are. Because I always say that it's like the most absurd joke ever played on humanity that women and men and women have somehow been convinced of women's inferiority in spite of our capacity to bleed for 7 days and not die, to grow whole new human beings in our bodies if we so choose, to feed, to sustain the lives of those babies with our bodies. And yet somehow we are walking around collectively looking at and treating women as though they are inferior, as though their value is just sort of, we could just, take it or leave it. And at some point on my own journey, I had this sort of aha, oh my gosh, how did that happen? And so I started to dig deeper in terms of how, what are the different things that go into us constructing our sense of reality and what is valuable and so on. And so, one of the one of the books really, because I really sought out, there was an entire year of my life, in fact, where I only read books written by women. And it wasn't screw you to men. It was just more I need to create balance. All of these years, and I was in my probably early 30s at the time, I have read almost exclusively books written by men. I was a history and English double major. Most of the history books I read were written by men. Most of the works of literature, because we deem great works of literature primarily those written by men. And I just thought, I'm going to try to balance out what I'm putting into my brain and get some female perspective. And anyway, so during that time, I also discovered Lynn Andrews. And I read Medicine Woman, which was the first of 3 of a trilogy that she wrote. And I was just blown away. It was one of the few times that I was reading this book and I felt like I was reading about myself. And I don't mean in a kind of even in a slightly detached way where you're oh, this totally reminds me of my life. I felt like I was in the book and somehow it was about me. I don't know how to explain it, but and so then I sought her out, and I studied under her for a couple of years, and then it was during that time that I started to create some workshops, just sort of dabbling in what would it look like for me to take what I know and start sharing it with girls, because I was, of course, keenly aware of how much time and energy I had put into this healing process based on my own experience as a girl. And I just kept thinking, wow, what would we be capable of if we didn't have to put so much energy into healing our wounds and we could just remain whole. Yeah. And so I found there was another really pivotal book that I had read that I highly recommend, which is called Shakti Woman. And that was written by Vicki Noble. And I reached out to Vicki because there were some things in her book that I thought, wow, this would be really potent to use. And she got back to me, and she was the one who said, I think you might be interested in this grad program. And so I went up to kind of visit the school and see what they were doing, and I was just blown away. And I'm sure, again, like many of us can relate to that moment of being like, I just know I need to do this, or this is where I need to be, or whatever. So that's how I ended up in grad school.
Yeah, that's how I felt about Real Girl.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So yeah. What do you think, what was the experience like going back a little bit before grad school? What was the experience of teaching high school like for you? And do you feel like there are things from that experience that I feel like there's, so many skills, I'm sure, that come into play with Real Girl. So and the work you do now, and I kind of think everything happens for a reason. So for sure. What was that experience like for you? What did you teach? Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I primarily taught freshman or ninth grade English, and then everything else I taught was pretty much world history, which I loved. And so it was a really potent experience for me, and it was a time, kind of like without even intentionally doing it, that became this really important time of research for me. That's really what I was doing. I hadn't set out to do it. I wasn't doing it in a super, structured way, but it gave me, 10 years of exposure to adolescent girls, because there were also a couple of years in there I was teaching middle school, where I knew, they were coming to me and I was witnessing firsthand what these girls were struggling with. It was also taking me back to my own experience, which is also not shocking to me now in hindsight. I say to moms all the time, because the moms will often come to me and say, I haven't thought about some of these, adolescent wounds or bumps or whatever in years. And now that I see my daughter going through them, they're through similar experiences, it's all coming up for me again, and I'm struggling. And I think that that's something that's really important for us, to be aware of. And so me as a teacher, I was, interacting with them in a slightly different context than as a parent, but nevertheless, it was, I was close to them. I had the opportunity to see, they were communicating with me. I was witnessing, I even had parents that would come in and be like, where's our daughter? Like, what happened to our daughter? This kid used to be getting, straight A's. She was outgoing. She was happy, and we don't even recognize her. And, when that happened, time after time, it just increased my, my commitment and my curiosity to really understand and get to the bottom of what was going on with these girls who had such tremendous potential and were either deliberately making themselves small, or they actually believed that they were just small, that they shouldn't take up too much space. I'm sure that's something I know that you're familiar with, like, when we talk about eating disorders and this whole idea that, like, we keep getting all of these messages that, as women, we should just sort of like not take up too much space, not say too much, all of which communicates indirectly and somewhat directly that what we have to say and the space that we occupy in one way or another just isn't really that valuable.
Yeah, which is crazy, and so great that you were able to see that and create something that totally helps combat that. But before we move on to talking about what Real Girl is, and a lot of the listeners, if they listen to the episode I did many episodes ago with Val, they know a bit about Real Girl, and I've talked about Real Girl before in the podcast many times. But before we do, we have a lot of teachers that listen to the podcast. So what would you say to, no matter what grade or age group they're working with, just some, while we're in that topic of your experience teaching, what are some things that teachers specifically can keep in mind to help with some of these things we've been addressing when it comes to girls?
Well, I think that first and foremost, and I speak a lot at schools and with parents about the importance of creating girl conscious educational environments. And that is not to say that we have this tendency to be like, well, if it's about girls, then it's not about boys. That is not what I'm saying. We're just trying to balance things out. And we can, talk at some point even today about, me moving into the realm of working with boys as well and why that's so important. But creating a girl conscious environment can mean things that are as simple as, regardless of what subject you're teaching. So if you're, middle high school teacher, where you're teaching maybe just one or two subjects, or if you're in an elementary school level and you're teaching all of the subjects, consistently looking for opportunities to show girls examples of women who have achieved they've made contributions, they've made achievements in those particular subject areas. And that can take a variety of forms. It can mean make sure that as you get your classroom ready for the new year or tomorrow when you go back into the classroom, that you have a balanced representation of quotes and successes and contributions of both men and women in the world. Misrepresentation did a phenomenal job, the documentary, with the whole, you can't be what you can't see. I mean, that is a fundamental truth as far as I'm concerned, that there's so much that goes into the way that we construct our reality that we are not even aware is going into the way that we construct our reality. And one of the biggest things, and, there's all kinds of data to back this up in terms of the way that the brain works, and that just, kids, you have a captive audience. If they're in elementary, they're sitting in your classroom for roughly 6 hours a day. If you teach middle or high school, you have any given group of kids in there for at least 1 hour a day. They're staring at the walls, sometimes to your dismay. Give them something to look at that shows them what they can be. And it's not just about showing the girls the contributions that women have made to the creation of society, but also showing boys. And I don't just mean that as like, so that boys know they should, appreciate and respect women, but also to take some of the weight off, so that we're not raising boys that they're supposed to shoulder the entire burden of building and sustaining our society. That in fact, they have amazing and very well-equipped partners who can do this with them. So everybody wins when we start to construct what they see and what their reality is on the day-to-day. So basic things like that. And none of this can happen, by the way, until we do the work ourselves of becoming aware of our own programming. Whether we're teachers, we're parents, we're coaches, we're counselors, we have to look at our own, so what is my perspective on the value that women hold, on the value that men hold, on the reality of working in partnership or not, as has been the case for a very long time. And that will start to influence not only sort of more overt decisions like the examples I've just given, but also the way that we speak, the things that we call out. There was a really phenomenal book written by Peggy Ornstein. A lot of people know right now her most recent, Girls and Sex, which is her most recent, amazing work. But I used in my my master's thesis her book, and I think it's called Schoolgirls, and it was all about girls' self-esteem. And she talks at length about these incredible studies she did, and working with teachers. This is 30 years ago, who would do things like if a class presentation had to be done on a social studies topic, saying to the girls, I want you to imagine that you were a man in this particular scenario, and saying to the boys, I want you to imagine what it would be like to be a woman in this scenario. And there being such resistance on the part of the boys to take on the role of women in history and even in present day. And that's a whole other, we can certainly go down that road, but that's always just indicative of what it is that we are saying collectively about the value or lack thereof for women, when it is considered to be demeaning for a boy to act like a woman, even as an assignment in a classroom, and yet it's always acceptable for a girl to take on the role of a man. Well, why? Because we consistently say that it means strength, it means courage, it means honor, it means value to be male, and to be female means usually the opposite, almost across the board. So anyway, all of that is to say that there are these small things, subtle things that we can do in terms of the way that we guide conversations in classrooms, the questions that we ask, to more overt things like the posters that we put on the board, or the additional, materials that we bring in that are maybe a little more gender balanced than the traditional textbooks and stuff that we are, often required to use in the classroom.
Yeah, all of that stuff is so good. So for people who maybe aren't familiar with Real Girl, let's go ahead and get into that and what it is, what you guys are doing right now. And, I think maybe a good place to kind of start with it, and feel free to go wherever you want to go with this question. But, and I really am eager to hear about what Real Girl is in your words, but you wrote this amazing book, and I would love to hear about the inception of that and how the idea came to you for that. But I think that is really the pillars of Real Girl really come from your book, which is called, it's amazing and everyone should read it. It's called 9 Ways We're Screwing Up Our Girls and How We Can Stop. So how did that idea come to you, and how does that work into Real Girl? And then go ahead and tell everyone what Real Girl actually is.
Sure. Okay. So
it's like 12 questions in one. I'm sorry.
Interestingly, they're all tied together.
That's what I figured.
Surprise. So I had said that, so when I was in grad school, finding that NYU stat really led me to become clear very quickly about what my master's thesis was going to be about. And it ended up being about, what I call the self-esteem crisis among girls and women in the Western world. And all of the research that I did for my master's thesis, which ended up being like 100+ page document, I had kind of envisioned like, oh, well, I could just translate this into less academic language and have this be something that would be available to not only parents, but counselors, coaches, and women and men, like anybody who knows a woman, anybody who is a woman, whether you have girls, daughters or not, or you're working with girls of whatever age. I wanted it to be sort of an eye-opening, here's what's going on. Here's what we're not talking about. We're talking about some of the more overt issues, but we're not really getting to what are the societal messages that are part of our religious practices and traditions, that are part of our school curricula, that are part of our certainly part of our media, so on and so forth. And so that was what I originally thought was going to eventually happen. Then, as I had told, as I had said earlier, in terms of this little community project that ultimately became Real Girl, so Real Girl was sort of in somewhere around the same time as me doing all the research for the thesis, and so Real Girl is informed by the research that I did at the time and research I've done since. And then the book that I thought was going to be like, oh, I could just translate this, I'll bang it out, and I don't know what I originally thought. Became a whole other undertaking, is the truth. The title came to me in a dream, is the honest answer to the title. Cool. And I pitched it to somebody who I was working with at the time. He's like, yeah, that's the title. And he challenged me to see what I could write in 30 days. And I don't want to get too much into this, but this particular person had a personality that I was like, oh, bring it. Like, I can do this. And so I wrote the outline for the book, thinking, of course, because I was still thinking in terms of just translating my thesis, that wouldn't be that big a deal. I was able to write the outline in 30 days, but as I wrote it, I realized that this was going to be a whole other journey that was going to require me to go even just deeper inside myself and start again continuing to sort of like peel back layers and be like, what's over here, Anea? What haven't you looked at over here? And so the book was my intention was to write a book that would be really accessible, conversational, non-shaming, because we do a whole lot of parent shaming in our society. It was really important that it be a we. experience, that I was coming from that place of, this is what we are collectively doing. The good news is that if we are creating it the way that we are currently creating it, that means if we take responsibility and acknowledge that, we also then have the power and the ability to create it differently. And I really wanted to put on the table in a sort of gentle and sometimes not so gentle way, all of the things that we have been doing for generations that are keeping girls and women in this space of not good enough.
Yeah.
And so I did, and it was painful and it was terrifying because it's such a personal, it's a very, like, there's so much of me in it, which I don't, beyond the regular ways that when you write a book, as I'm sure you can relate, we of course we're in it, but this was really, I share, anecdotes and different experiences that I had, including the one I shared at the beginning of this with the abusive relationship I was in. But the result has been quite phenomenal in terms of, people who read it that say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, because this is the problem, is so many of the things that we're doing are happening in spite of really good intentions as parents, as teachers, as counselors, etc. And it's this, all of these things that we're doing continue to sort of fly beneath the radar because they become so part of our cultural fabric that we don't even see them. We don't even realize how detrimental and how we are perpetuating the state that girls and women are in terms of their self-esteem, self-value, if I think is the word I really like to use because it really nails the word self-value is just meatier. It really gets to the heart of what we're talking about when we say self-esteem. And then also how our ways about our sort of collective disdain for the feminine is also informing the way that we're raising our boys and is doing them a huge disservice. And I don't really get into that in the book, but the next book is going to be about boys and how we're screwing up our boys, and cool. Two are connected. So,
yeah. So the book came before Real Girl, the program, is that right?
No, actually, the program had already started. It was, I wrote the book. So Real Girl launched in January of 2011, and the book came out in 2014. So it was like, about halfway point of Real Girl, then the book, and then, it has continued to grow. And as you know, because you've done the training, Real Girl is a living curriculum, meaning, the research that we do that informs the activities and just the curricula in its entirety is always growing and changing because we're dealing with complex creatures. That's what human beings are. And so we always have to be making these changes and increasing its potency and efficacy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's key, especially with the demographic and the age group, and especially in the, the internet age and how quickly technology is changing. This younger generation really would not respond to something that seems at all stale. And so
That's
it's
right.
So great that it's living and breathing and updated. And so you were in something, in the instructor training that I really, really appreciated from you. And there was, wasn't it an amazing group that we had?
It was, and this is not to take away from previous groups, it was one of the most extraordinary experiences just in terms of just the mix of personalities and just the age range, right? We had a really extraordinary, age range, I think from 23 to 63.
Yeah.
And it was such a beautiful thing because, and I always say that when women, come out and do the training, because the training can really be, you can take it as a training, and one day I want to be a Real Girl instructor. And even if you decide you never want to be a Real Girl instructor for whatever reason, it's such a transformative experience to sit in a circle of women and have this sort of contribution and guidance. It's amazing. Yeah. It was an amazing group. Yes.
It really was. It was a magical group. And I commend you so much for listening to us with suggestions or like, hey, have you seen this video and this should be part of the curriculum, and listening to, different things that are very similar to what's in it now, but maybe just, an updated video or an updated perspective. And I think that's so important, is taking in all of that and knowing that this new generation will be so receptive to new content, which is so cool. So for everyone listening, tell us a little bit about what REALGirl, the program, is and how it works, and how people listening can, get involved or learn more about it. I've already had so many, just in the few times that I've mentioned REALGirl so far, so many people have been telling me that they want to become an instructor, or they want to have this for their children or for their daughters. So tell us about what it is and how the camps work and the after school programs, and kind of where REALGirl is today.
Sure. So REALGirl is a research-based, self-esteem focused program for girls. We start with girls. Now we originally started with girls at the age of 9. Now we've bumped it down to 8, which is really exciting, because given that data around, when self-esteem peaks, the earlier, it's just always easier to be proactive and keep something whole, keep something in place, than to have to do damage control. It's not hopeless. I certainly am not like, well, if we can't get them before they're 12, forget it. Like, it's not like that. It's just really exciting when you see these little 8 and 9-year-olds come in, and there's just so much potential, and you're really just sort of like affirming it. So it's based. So the core curricula is 9 modules, and every single module is based on the issues that I, in my research, determined, like, here are the messages that girls are getting. We are going to directly counter those messages, but we're going to help them become aware of where those messages are coming from, how they might be affecting the way that they see themselves, and help them create a filter so that they can, in future, because those messages aren't going away anytime soon, right? I wish I could just like wave a magic wand and be like, okay, we're living in a balanced world where we, value both male and female, everything. And so basically every single module, is addressing these core messages that girls are getting that chip away at their self-esteem. And we want to develop a sense of personal agency, a sense of personal value. We do a lot of, the very first module is discovering your real self. So this whole idea of like, what does real mean? What does authentic mean? What does it feel like to be your real self? What does it feel like to not be your real self? And every one of these girls, even at the age of 8, immediately when you ask that question, they know what you're talking about. They know what it feels like to say, well, I wanted to say such and such, but I thought that she might not like me if I did. Or I didn't know what, that person, and this is part of the thing, entire chapter of my book, by the way, as you know, on raising pleasers, and how, although we do it a little bit with boys, we definitely do it with girls. And so discovering your real self, is a way of, we start there because we want to give the girls a foundation and permission and a safe place to explore, okay, so who am I already becoming? Because I think that's going to please other people in my life, my parents, my teachers, my siblings, my friends. And then who am I really? What are my values? What makes my heart sing? What do I feel passionate about? And then it goes from there. So creating your own path, the whole idea of girls having agency, being able to be authors of their own stories or captains of their own ship. They haven't got a lot of that modeling. I mean, we're just now in 2016, hopefully going to have our first female president. People underestimate what it says to girls when we say, and they hear through the media far worse, that a woman is not capable for any variety of reasons, not capable of leadership, not capable of stability, not capable of, holding power, et cetera, and to be in the most powerful position, arguably, in the world. So the second module is creating your own path. Then media and body image and media and gender roles, right? Which is pretty self-explanatory, helping girls become aware of all of these images that they're seeing. And then when we get into gender roles, not only the images you're seeing like in magazines, but what do you see people doing, and what messages does the media have about what we value and what we maybe don't value so much? How are we saying that girls should act, dress, look, behave? What are we saying about boys, etc.? Then my favorite is your magical, powerful female body. And I think maybe you and Val talked about this, but just how fundamentally important it is to keep girls connected to their bodies. We do so much body shaming, and specifically, we really dive into teaching girls about their entire cycle, their entire menstrual cycle. It's not just about having a 5 to 7 day period. It's about an entire cycle and how their hormones work. And we do it in different, each age group has a different curriculum based on their developmental needs and so on. But that's hugely important. So when girls leave going, oh my gosh, I have a superhero body, I can't stress how transformative that is. And then we get into creating healthy relationship with yourself so that you can create a healthy relationship with others. And then, conflict resolution, assertive communication, self-defense, and so on. So all of that stuff is part of these 9 modules. And our goal is that the girls are going to leave fundamentally changed in terms of, more than anything, the way that they see themselves. So that's what it is.
Yeah. Oh man. Just hearing you go through it again, really, it gives me chills, because I told you this in my application essay to become an instructor and go through the training. And I've told you this many times, but when I found your work through Val and REALGirl, I really felt like everything you just went over, all 9 modules, are everything I wished that I would have known when I was younger and taught myself through self-study in my early 20s, and have gotten to, a much better place. And it's honestly, the 9 modules are really things I've been sharing about on the podcast since I started the podcast, because all of this information was so helpful and transformative to me. And I had been thinking a lot about what my life would have been like if I knew this information earlier. Mm-hmm. And then I found REALGirl, and I was like, yes, this is happening. And it's so comprehensive, and it's so impactful, and honestly so fun too. Like, it's so fun, and there's such a great community element to it. It sounds like an ad for REALGirl, and I guess it is, but I'm just your biggest fan. And yeah, it's just so comprehensive. And even though, like I said, I'd been learning this stuff about, everything from the power of my body to doing, the deep body image work, and, learning about authenticity and becoming better at being myself. I'd been learning that for several years before I found REALGirl, but then when I went through the training, I learned so much more. I thought that I knew a lot about that stuff, but I learned so much more, and it was just such a great experience. So I can't thank you enough for creating it and having me, and it was such a great experience to get to know you and to hang out, and now have you on the podcast sharing it with everyone else. So thanks for making REALGirl.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And it's always really exciting. I mean, of course it's exciting for me to hear that, it had this impact on you, but it's also so exciting. And frankly, it takes a little bit of the pressure off, or, what I carry, which I've just sort of accepted as like, this is part of, what my work in the world is to be, and I'm happy to do it. But when I encounter young women like yourself who are, doing this kind of work, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm not holding it by myself. Like, look at the great things that are happening. And I really believe that each generation it's going to happen, sooner and sooner. My youngest daughter just turned 8, and my oldest is 20. And so it's been really interesting even for me to see, like, the mother that I was, at 26 versus the mother that I was when I became a mom the second time at 38. And it's just really hopeful to me that there are women like you that are seeing this, that are doing the work, that are spreading the word, that are supporting other women, that are changing the way that we view the value of the feminine. And it's just, I'm equally grateful to you, Katie, not only in terms of the podcast, but just, the work that you are doing for yourself, is just phenomenal and really inspiring.
Thank you. This is so much shine theory. Are you familiar with shine theory? Have you read that article?
No, please.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna send it to you after this. You'll love it. Essentially, it's this concept. And Friedman wrote this article for the New Yorker or the New York magazine, The Cut, and it's basically about how one woman's success brings up all of the people around her in her life. And it's just essentially like breaking down the notion of competition and how it's all community and everyone working together. And she uses in the article the example of Beyonce and Kelly Rowland, and how Beyonce's success as Kelly Rowland's friend is like such a positive, powerful thing. And I just think, it takes a village, and we all need to be doing this work in our own unique way and working together. And I just love it. And I love that REALGirl has so many supporters. I mean, I like to take the cake as your biggest fan. Yes. But I'm not alone. Elle Fanning is your most recent public supporter, which is such an amazing, amazing thing. And I was in tears watching her talk about REALGirl. And so could you talk about what was that experience like as the founder and creative director of this organization, seeing it spoken about on such a huge platform through Elle Fanning's donation to it?
Well, so it's, as you can imagine, because this has been quite literally my blood, sweat, and tears. Yeah. And it's just so much a part of me. And I don't mean that in an ego way as much as I mean like this has been it's representative of my own healing, just countless hours of just passionate, dedicated work. And so anytime that I hear that it resonates with someone, whether, it's whatever, if you're, an unknown person, if you're Elle Fanning, it's obviously amazing. And what was particularly exciting was, so this is how it went down. Elle came out to visit one of our camps last year because we were sort of like, what would it look like? How could we, what would it look like and feel like to have, a young woman around Elle's age sort of become a face, not the face, but a face for REALGirl, so that we're not just dealing with moms and saying, because moms get it right away, but so that their daughters, we're starting to bring their daughters into the mix and have the girls being like, I want to do REALGirl. And so Elle came to one camp. And by the time she left, she was just like you said, my life, had I had something like this when I was young, would have been so different. Yeah. And so now, we're sort of like, okay, well, we'd really like to be involved. And then she got on some big movie and she was in Europe and we were going to circle back. All of a sudden I get this email from her agent saying, Elle would really like to chat with you for a minute or two today. Do you have time? I was like, of course. Mm-hmm. And Elle called and she said, I'm going to be on the cover of Variety magazine this month, which is really exciting. But what's more exciting is they asked me if I was attached to any charity that I'd like to support, and I told them REALGirl. And so Variety magazine is going to send you a check for $10,000. Amazing. It was, because let me tell you, $10,000 goes a long way, especially, and this is, I am 100%. The thing about self-esteem is that it is an issue that transcends socioeconomic status, ethnicity, blah, 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 blah. It is, it is primarily a female issue. That is not to say that boys and men do not struggle with self-esteem. Again, but it's, we have expanded into Guatemala as of about a year and a half ago. And our program there is bursting at the seams, like schools waitlisted, on and on. And just to put it into perspective, $1,000 puts 15 girls through a 25, basically like their entire school year program. And so for somebody to call me and be like, so I'm going to give you $10,000, like all I can see is like these girls' lives being transformed by this money in a significant way. And that makes all the blood, sweat, and tears well worth it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful.
So yeah. So we're super excited to have, Elle bringing attention and speaking about it. And it was really a beautiful moment on this whole journey, this whole real journey. Mm-hmm.
So cool. So I want to talk about feminism a little bit more. And I was really excited knowing that I had this conversation with you today and jotted down several things I'm going to ask you, and it's flying by, but I want to know your thoughts on everything going on in the world, and particularly this election cycle, and how you're feeling and how you can kind of give your opinions on how people can handle their feelings around women's rights and everything going on right now during this time in the world that we're in. Can you just kind of give us your thoughts on that?
Sure. That's a big question. I think, given where we are and what we're facing, I think that, the political state that this particular country is in speaks volumes. And we know that it speaks volumes about more than just feminism. It speaks volumes about the level of racism, the degree of racism that still exists in this country. And I think what's important, as disturbing as the conversation has been, and as disturbing as these, realities that are being uncovered are, the fact that we're talking about them like anything, right? If you think about just a relationship that you have in your life and, we're kind of making it through on the day to day and it's pretty good, we're functioning, we're, pretty nice to each other, but you can feel when there's something underneath that's not being talked about, that's sort of this poison or this cancer that's growing in silence. And I think what's really important about this election is that it is bringing to the surface, it is forcing conversations that need to be had for us to really look at the reality. And without being disparaging, I'll before I say what I'm going to say, I have a little bit different perspective because my perspective living in the United States comes with a certain objectivity, not full objectivity, but more objectivity than people who are Americans who have lived here their entire lives. I'm Canadian, born and raised. And so from the time I came to this country, I could see things that I knew that people who were in it, which is always the case, just like there's things that we as Canadians can't see that are part of our own crap. But I could see a lot of lip service being paid to we're the greatest country in the world and we're all about democracy and, liberty and justice for all. And I thought, do they just think that if they keep saying it enough times, that makes it real, as opposed to doing the work of actually not only creating those things, but actively sustaining them, participating in in sustaining those different things that we claim to be part of this country's reality. So as that applies to feminism, I mean, everything from the fact that we have a candidate running who has spoken so overtly disparagingly, not only about various races, but certainly about women, and that's even still a consideration, I think speaks volumes about where we're actually at, not only with regard to racism, but also with regard to sexism and the way that we really view women. And that's magnified by the fact that we are, once again, doing all the things, we saw it in the Olympics too, side note, and I don't know if you've talked about that at all in your podcast, and I thought it was so great though, that this time around on the Olympics, we actually had really great, on the ball people calling out the commentators that were speaking disparagingly or speaking differently about female athletes than they were about male athletes. And so by the same token, what we see happening, what's coming to the surface, is that in spite of the fact that we want to say that we're one of the most progressive countries in the world, it's 2016, the fact alone that we've not yet had a woman in the Oval Office, and that now we have the ability to do that, we have the potential to have that be a reality, and that we spend so much time and energy poking holes, not on political policy, although that's happening too, but on things that are related to the fact that Hillary Clinton is a woman, and that somehow that makes her less capable. And it's especially magnified, as I said, given that we're looking at those criticisms against her opponent, who is, in my opinion, a terrifying option. Yeah. So anyway, so all that is to say that I think that as disturbing as this whole thing has been for me and continues to be, I feel like the fact that we're having the conversations and it's coming to the surface is a really important precursor to valuable, lasting change.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. You're so articulate. So I'm glad that we spoke on that topic. Another thing that we talk about a lot on the podcast, and I ask everyone who comes on the show, is body image. And like you said, it's a huge component of REALGirl, which I, of course, love. But I would like to know, have you ever struggled with body image? And I ask everyone, if so, does it still come up for you? And if it does, what are some of your go-to tactics to shift out of that mindset and remind yourself of your body's goodness and your body's power, so it doesn't take you out and take you away from your life? What are some things to shift you out of a bad body image moment?
So the first question was, do I still struggle? And absolutely yes is the answer. That's the honest answer. So the piece that I didn't share about, just because it didn't come up, I was, although when I look at pictures, I truly am like, well, yeah, I was like a little bit chubby as I was like, entering adolescence and my hormones. I was carrying a little extra weight. I also was, I'm of Ukrainian descent. So of course I was eating lots of pierogies when I was young. But I got called a lot of names in 3rd and 4th grade, like really hurtful stuff that is still with me. I can still remember. I can remember names and faces and names that I was called. And when I was in 6th grade, so in Canada, so, and maybe it was just the time more than it was the place, you were in elementary school till you were in 6th grade, and then you went into junior high for 7th grade. So between 6th and 7th grade, I decided no more of this. Of course, I wanted to be liked and feel attractive to boys, and I wanted to not be called names anymore because it was so hurtful. So I went on a diet. I lost, 15 or 20 pounds. I also grew. And when I went into junior high, all of those boys that had been teasing me and calling me names were suddenly were falling over themselves to get my attention. And it was such an unfortunate, clear message that it didn't matter how creative, how funny, how smart I was. What mattered was how I looked. And so it set a really deep, some really deep programming happened for me around what was actually considered valuable about me. And so it has been a lifelong struggle for me to develop a positive, loving relationship with my body. I can tell you that when I started trusting my body and listening to it, and some of that happened as I was learning also about my cycle and understanding how things were going to shift in terms of, bloating and, energy and all those things. But my relationship with my body started shifting when I started learning more about it, which is why it's such an important part of REALGirl. And so as I became more gentle with my body, I trusted that if I listened that it wanted a particular food, if I had it and I could have it in moderation, because I could always decide to have it an hour later, a day later, a week later, instead of restricting myself, my body found this shape that it has primarily been in outside of my pregnancies since I was in my early 20s. So, and I really believe in that. Like all the dieting and everything that we do when we fight against our bodies, I think is really detrimental to just instead of allowing our body, if we make a commitment, which is what I've done. So this is part of my self-love regimen. I exercise regularly, at least 5 to 6 days a week. It's not super hardcore. I do spin 3 days a week, and then I do hikes and walks and whatever. And I eat healthy. And what I mean by that is whether I'm exercising or I'm putting food into my body, I try to do it not as a way of I'm going to punish myself, so I'm going to work out really hard. I'm going to get rid of that cellulite. Or I'm not going to eat that thing I really want because my body doesn't deserve that. It's going to make me fat. Instead, everything that I put into my body or the exercise that I do is an act of self-love. And I really believe that my body has responded to that because it's a living organism by finding the shape that it wants, the size that it wants, the amount of fat that it wants, the amount of muscle that makes it feel strong. And then on the days when I'm having a bad body image day, I really do a lot of self-talk. I honestly do. I'm just like, I love you, Anea. Oh my gosh, look at those legs. Look what they do for you every day. We do this body appreciation meditation in REALGirl, which is a much longer thing. But sometimes I'll just go oh my gosh, what would it feel like if your legs didn't work? Those, what would it, you're complaining about, your arms getting, looser as you, move well into your 40s, but what would it be like if my arms didn't work? I had this thing about my breasts my entire life. And I remember hearing this story. I was at this, in this small group of women at one point, and this woman was telling a story of how she and her best friend had grown up being really critical of their bodies. And in their 40s, her best friend had breast cancer. And she said, as we were she was laying beside her in her hospital bed, and it still makes me emotional. Her friend said, all of that time and energy I put into criticizing my body, all I want is for my body to just be healthy and not killing me right now. And I think about that when I want to beat myself up. And I think, love yourself. Be so grateful for your health. Love those healthy cells so that they want to keep creating more healthy cells. And just be grateful that you look the way that you look, that you feel the way you feel. And I think my body responds accordingly.
Yeah, it definitely does. You are so beautiful and so comfortable in your skin, and you seem so embodied. It was really, really magnetic, and I told you this when I was with you, but it was so positive for me to be around for the days I spent with you at your house. It was just really contagious, and I wanted to just soak it up. I wish we were hanging out right now, eating snacks and talking in person. But yeah, it really shows, and it's so powerful where you've come with all of that. So, staying on this topic of body image a little bit, can you give us a little bit of how the girls you see and work with are coming in terms of their perceptions of their body, and, how REALGirl is able to shift that for them? And is it different than, it's probably honestly not much different than what we experienced when we were younger, but do you think that it's getting better, getting worse? Kind of what is the pulse on what young girls are feeling towards their bodies?
I would say that I believe it's getting worse with bigger potential to get better. So by that I mean that I think that what girls are subjected to in terms of everywhere media, in terms of social media, so when there are a few things that disturb and pain me more than hearing about a girl who has been, is putting up a photo or YouTube, tell me, am I pretty or am I ugly? And having these people just so cruelly, first of all, the fact that she's asking the question, reminds me of being, myself, 6th grade going into 7th grade going, so I guess this is what defines if I'm good or not. So I need to find out, am I pretty or am I ugly? And then to have these people just rail on her because they have no response, they don't take responsibility. And then to hear about girls committing suicide or starving themselves or whatever. It's just that, all of that, and subjecting to, social media in terms of people saying really mean things and having platforms for that. Okay, so that's how I think that they're being subjected to something that's even worse than my generation and probably for at least a portion of your, young years. The way that I think that it's getting better is I absolutely believe, and the fact that, your podcast exists and you're talking about the subjects that you're talking about, is I believe that there is a collective awakening that is happening. I believe that sort of the divine feminine is what I would call it, is coming, is waking up. It's like the goddess is is stirring. And I think that the fact that we are talking about things like menstruation, and I always go to that for a very specific reason. And again, full chapter of my book dedicated to this subject, because menstruation is something that is defining. It is something that specifically defines a female body as being different from a male body. And if we are going to tell girls, either by making it a taboo subject that we say nothing about and therefore saying a whole bunch about it, or that we are going to overtly shame girls about, that we haven't got a hope of them feeling connected and loving toward their bodies. done. So that's why we go straight for it. And I think that's the way, the fact that we are talking more openly, and there's, just these different, thinks, and, I happen to co-own an organic tampon company called True Moon. There's, what's the other one? The one that had those really great videos. I can't even remember them right now, but there's just been some really great stuff that's been up and around, and bringing that topic to the surface, which I think will fundamentally change the way that girls feel about being female and that particular aspect of being female.
Yeah. Tell everyone about True Moon and your feminine care line. And I love that it celebrates this attitude of, celebrating our femininity and being a woman. How did that come to be?
Yeah, so it's actually connected to REALGirl. My business partner, Shelly, would often, be sitting in on some of our workshops and camps. Sometimes she was there taking video, whatever. And she was in on a one group that we had, and it was girls that were like 12, 13, 14 years old. And we talked before and after about, like, how do you feel about the topic of menstruation? How did you feel when you first got your period, blah, blah, blah. And then after we did the moon cycle presentation, which you know about, Katie, because we did it in our training, we asked them again, how do you feel now? And one little girl said, the only thing that I was told before was that having my period was punishment for what Eve did. And Shelly and I looked at each other, and we're just like, okay, this has to stop. This messaging has to stop. Like, the very thing that is responsible for the continuation of the species, our capacity to grow human beings, if we so choose, this amazing cycle that is, parallel to other powerful cycles in nature, is a topic of shame. So True Moon really came out of, like, yes, we wanted to offer women a healthy feminine care option, because our vaginas happen to be the most porous part of our body. And if you put a tampon in that has chemicals in it, you're asking for trouble. But more importantly, and the thing that really has defined True Moon, is we wanted the education piece to be part of that. So yes, we wanted to provide this healthier, safer option in terms of feminine care, but more importantly, we wanted to use that as a vehicle for educating girls and women about the realities of their cycle, the power of their cycle. Even when it comes with cramps and all that other stuff, there's still portions of our cycle that gives us such tremendous strength. And so we wanted to bring that to the table. So that's really how True Moon came about, and why it exists, why it's so important to us.
Yeah, it's so cool. You gave me a kit of True Moon, and it's in my bathroom out, for people to use if they want, but also as like a billboard for people to ask me about it. And I love that they do. Yeah.
Katie, you're so great. Thank you.
Yeah, I told you, I'm your cheerleader.
You are.
So you're like me, Anea, and you do about 1,000,001 things. Another thing that you do, and while I was researching you for the podcast today, I actually listened to an episode of it, even though I'm not a parent myself, but you co-host a Rad Parenting podcast. I listened to your episode with Ben Lee, who I love. It was such a good episode.
Oh, he was so amazing.
Oh my God, he seems way cool.
He's incredible. He's incredible, and it was just a true honor to have the opportunity to interview him and get his perspectives on parenting and this whole spiritual component. And my gosh, yeah, like if somebody was gonna listen to one episode, honestly, I'd be like, go for that one. Rad Parenting again came up really organically, and it is honestly the easiest, funnest thing that I do of all the things that I do. And it's just really been it's been tremendously successful in a relatively short period of time. And I think the reason is that the topic of parenting is so charged, because when we become parents, we want to get it right, we want to do it well, and it also comes, like, our kids don't come with a guidebook. And I think our generation is in this unique, really beautifully powerful position to make a huge change in terms of the way that our children grow up and the kinds of human beings that they become. And So parents are tuning in, they want guidance, but Joe, my co-host on Rad Parenting, is a comedian. So we're diving into all these like really intense topics with levity, because there's lots of banter and laughter, and he's also a parent, and there's no shaming, there's no authoritative you should or you must, but just my expertise as a researcher and a professional, and as a parent, and then Joe's comedy and his experience as a parent, and the combination, it just seems to be a really great mix that people are really digging. So I'm super proud of it and happy that you mentioned it.
Yeah. Oh, it's honestly so good. And I had about 10 million questions that I wanted to ask you, and a bunch of them were on parenting. But I have to ask you the quick fire questions and the questions I ask everyone, because people tweet at me if I don't, and they'll be upset. So we have to get to those. I'm going to not ask my questions about parenting and just suggest that people go and listen to Rad Parenting, because it's such a good podcast. I'm not even a parent or anywhere close to being a parent, but I loved it and got so much value out of it.
Thank you.
So.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple questions that I ask everyone, and some that are specific to you that are more fun, and we can kind of we got to burn through these. So we'll do them as like more quick fire, but take your time. So what does your morning routine look like? Maybe you can share a couple of the first things you do when you wake up in the morning, and how that affects how the rest of your day goes.
Sure. I try to wake up before my 8-year-old so that I can have at least 30 to 45 minutes of time to myself. During that time, I make a gigantic cup, like 3 tea bags of green tea. And I right now am moving through 3 books. A Woman's Worth by Marianne Williamson for the second or third time.
I love that book.
I'm reading Osho, which my oldest daughter introduced me to, and loving that. I'm reading a book called Love, Freedom, and Aloneness, and also The Soul of Money, because I've got some stuff that I'm working through around money. And so that's what I do for the first half an hour of my day. I almost treat it like a meditation, to sit and read and know consciously that I'm doing something for myself before I go and I'm in service as a parent, or in the other ways that I try to be in service to others.
Love that. Great morning routine. And I am a green tea drinker as well.
Yep. It's where it's at.
It's the best. So what about on the other end of the day? What are some of your evening routines, last few things you do before bed? How do you wind down and relax after your day?
I get my little one to bed. Usually her bedtime is like between 8:30 and 9. And then I usually wind down by just sort of making sure I'm ready for the next day. I like to make my to-do list for the next day so that I kind of go to bed knowing what I'm waking up to. And then the thing I've been doing now for several months that I really love, and I sort of call it a palate cleanser, is I watch comedy. So I'll watch like a Netflix, like I love John Mulaney. I've been watching Jim Gaffigan, like that kind of comedy that is just light and fun, and it just puts me to sleep with just sort of a lightness that
Yes.
I really love.
Oh, I love that. I, as you know too, am a huge fan of comedy, and I think it's really, like you said, it's great to kind of shut off, but also I think comedians are really the philosophers of our day. So it does kind of the same work that you're doing, and we're talking about shifting the way we see things and seeing things in our daily life a little bit differently.
Agreed. 100%.
Yeah. So you live in LA, but like you said, you grew up in Canada. And I heard recently that, on another podcast actually, that LA isn't really a easy city like maybe New York or Paris to be a tourist in, and it's rather, it's better to come to LA pretending you're a local during your visit to have a great experience with it. So for someone who's lived in LA for many years, what advice would you give to someone visiting LA for the first time, and what do you love most about the city that you live in?
Rent a car. That's the big challenge of getting around LA, is it's just not like public transportation friendly. And so get a car and map out
Uber.
Or Uber. Yeah. I mean, you'd have to weigh out whatever's more, financially friendly for you. And then plan out what you want to do before you get here, with a certain degree of openness in terms of just discovering what else there might be. And the thing I love most about LA is easy. I mean, as a girl from the prairies in Canada, I wake up here almost every day so thankful that I don't really have to think about the weather, because most days it's going to be sunny, it's going to be warm without being too hot. We have some, super hot hot days. But that is that vitamin D is so good for my soul, and we pay for that with traffic. But if you live in an area that you love and you don't have to drive too far, it's the jam. I love it.
Yes, and you have a lemon tree in your backyard.
I do.
Which is amazing. What is your favorite part, if you had to pick one thing, of the work that you do with women and girls?
My favorite part. My favorite part is when I see those moments of like, my voice matters, my thoughts matter, I love my body, because I think that that's a precursor to stepping out into the world and offering the gifts. I think that we all, Michael Meade says that we all come into the world, every human being comes in with an inner genius or an inner gift. And I think that the moment that the beginning of that healing happens, or we recognize our value, or that there's something that we have to offer, I think the next step is that we're able to figure out how we're going to do that and to live in the world in a more healthy, whole way. And I just think that that's beautiful.
That is beautiful. So if you had to describe your feminism in about one sentence or so, how would you define your feminism and what feminism means to you today?
So feminism to me means creating balance in the world, so that I think of humanity as a team, and I feel like for a few thousand years now, we've only been playing with half of our team, and the other half has been sitting on the bench. So to me, feminism is all about rallying to support those that have been sitting on the bench, which is mostly the female half of our team, and getting the whole team to realize what a benefit it is for us all if we're all playing to our fullest potential. So that's what feminism is to me. And what was the other part of that question?
That was it, and mic drop, because that's the best definition of feminism that I've ever heard in my life. That is so good. So if you could whisper in the ears of mothers, what is one piece of advice that you would give to mothers today?
Be the woman. Embody the woman that you want your daughter to become.
You're killing it. Also beautiful answer. What is your ultimate vision and goals? Big, think like humongous and quadruple everything. What is your ultimate vision for Real Girl?
Global access to girls and women, as it turns out, it's probably going to be boys too. But global access, and what I mean by that is the opportunity, and we see it happening in Guatemala, to reach women and girls in various parts of the world, and whisper into their ears, you are so valuable, and we need you so that we can all be whole.
Oh, I love that. Oh, you're killing it with these answers. So good. So this question's kind of personal to me, and I would love your advice on this. So this is kind of a selfish one, but I think it'll help other people too. So you, like me, like I said, do lots of things, and I've lately been feeling kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. So do you ever feel that way? Do you ever struggle with feeling unfocused? And how do you bring yourself to focus, to concentrate on one particular thing?
You remember me saying that I've got 3 books going right now, right?
Are we just twins in this?
Seriously, I don't, it's so, okay, so I can't, let me see here. I have a hard time saying no to anything that I feel passionate about, or that I feel like I can have a hand in helping, or, so that's the part of what makes it difficult, right? To be focused.
Yes, I hear that. I feel like we're very similar.
Oh my gosh, it's really not like I'm Superwoman and I have to say yes to everything, because it's not really from a place of pleasing. It really is more that if I can, I want to.
Yeah, and it's not even people pleasing. I so relate to what you're saying. It's almost like I want to. I know I can help and I want to, and I think it would be fun.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And I think so the way that I get focused, honestly, has more to do with my focus comes with what's the next thing that absolutely has to be dealt with now. So whether it's like a proposal deadline, or I have to prepare for a speaking engagement, or, I have a writing deadline, or whatever, that is what dictates what I focus on, most immediately, and everything else kind of, has to be put to the side. The challenge is that, when there's not a specific deadline, oh my gosh, like I just have a list, and I try to knock as many things off on any given day. And that's part of what my to-do is all about is, okay, prioritize Anea and try to stay focused. That's the best I can do. That and a little caffeine.
Yeah, I totally get that. So, okay, this one is also kind of selfish, but again, I think I'm not alone in my curiosity about this. But sometimes I know for me, and lately this has been something I've been thinking quite a lot about. My therapist actually told me that I used to always say, oh, I feel so many feelings, and I'm always feeling feelings. And she told me recently, she was like, Katie, you don't feel feelings, you think feelings. And you need to be in your body more and actually feeling things and feeling your emotions to define them. So do you have any advice? Because you seem like a very embodied person. So I'm kind of just like asking everyone this lately because it's something that I'm thinking a lot about. But about actually feeling our feelings, even the discomfort or the negative ones, and actually being in them so you can move through them. Because, on the other side of sadness is happiness and joy. But we don't want to feel the feelings we don't want to feel. So we work over them, or we eat over them, or we do, other things over them. So how do you get yourself to feel?
Or we think over them, which is where all the thinking comes. Yeah, I spend a lot of time in my head. So this has been a new practice for me, and I think it really requires a conscious effort that starts to become, as with anything that we decide we're going to practice and that we want to make part of our, our embodied reality. And so I have to consciously choose to drop down into my body. It's easiest for me when I'm like, I have a little altar that I'll sit at, and I'll just have like 10 minutes of quiet time and really try to be present and, drop down into my body, which to me is also dropping down into my intuition and my wisdom, which feels different than all the chaos when my brain is running the show. And in terms of, I love that you referenced the feelings in terms of sitting with them. So I've been, again, consciously choosing as of late, and it's more recent than I'd like to admit, but of sitting with sadness and almost picturing myself, like it's almost like I'll put the sadness in the center. If I close my eyes, it's almost like I'm circling it. I'm walking around and I'm looking at it from all sides, but I'm just letting it be, and I'm asking it to tell me what it is it has to teach me. So that happens to work for me. And I have also found, and I think this is what helps for it to become more embodied, is that when you do that and you start to see how much more quickly you move through it than when you resist it or you numb it, that's incentive to keep coming back and doing it that way. So instead of running from it, sitting with it, looking at it, asking what it has to teach us, when you start to see that you move through it more quickly, you're like, oh, I'm going to try that again, because that's much better than having this drag out for weeks and months.
Yes. Well, it must have been my intuition that I knew you'd come through. I knew I could ask you that question and you would have a good answer. That is so helpful to me right now in particular. So yeah, so good. All right, these next few ones we can burn through because they're much lighter. So favorite color?
Red, yellow, orange.
Favorite day of the week?
Oh, wow. Friday.
Favorite hour of the day?
Like first thing. First dawn.
Nice. Favorite vegetable?
I like lots of different vegetables. Cucumber, tomato, avocado mixed together.
Oh, yum. Favorite fruit?
A hard nectarine.
Ooh, yeah. So like thirst quenching, right?
Yes, it's awesome.
Favorite or best meal you've eaten recently, like in the last week, something that comes to mind?
What I had last night was pretty good. I had this like lemon chicken piccata with mashed potatoes and grilled vegetables, and it was amazing.
Ooh, yum. Favorite way to relax?
Massage.
Oh, yes. I just had one yesterday at the airport. That was
Yeah,
amazing.
it's so good.
What's the best part of your day so far today?
This.
Yay! Me too.
Yeah, so much fun.
What is your favorite city that you've ever traveled to?
Ooh, wow. Gosh, that's a tough one. I don't know that I can. I really loved Paris this last time around, I have to say. London. Let's go with London. I was there earlier this year, and it was the bomb because I'm like, I'm in a foreign country, but we speak the same language.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really want to go to London as well, and
so
Paris.
Good. So good.
What are you most excited about in your life right now?
I'm excited about our expansion in Guatemala because the impact is so profound and it's so inspiring. So that for sure.
Really good. What is the best lesson you've learned about romantic relationships?
The best lesson that I've learned that there has to be a balance, a constant awareness of we each need to honor our own journey, and that the moment that we ask our partner to veer off of theirs to better meet ours, or vice versa, that we're going off track, and we need to communicate and see if we can get sort of back into parallel paths again, or that we may have come to the end of our cycle together in terms of inspiring growth in each other, and it may be time to construct our relationship in a different way, like maybe a no longer romantic relationship.
Yeah, nice. So this is the time where you recommend a bunch of stuff. So favorite movie or a movie you saw recently that you want to recommend, anything that's coming to mind in that category?
I saw Tarzan not too long ago in the theater, and it was I thought just spectacular. There were some issues with it, but I thought it was one of the most beautiful movies I've seen in a long time.
Cool. Yeah, I wanted to see that as well. What about a song? Either a favorite song, one you come back to a lot, or one that right now you've been listening to on repeat? Anything you want to recommend?
Oh my God, that's embarrassing.
Tell us.
Jeez, I listen to so much pop music. It's embarrassing.
I love
it. Oh goodness gracious. I can't even believe I'm saying this. There is a couple of new Justin Bieber tunes that I just love, and I am embarrassed to say that. I guess that he's Canadian. I want to support my Canadians. But there's just something about these a couple new songs, Lifeline, I think, and Cold Water or something. I just like them. I just dig them.
Yeah, catchy. Can't go wrong there. What about TV show? Anything that has been...
Oh, yes. And this is both lovely and frustrating. Mm-hmm. I am rewatching through Netflix The Commander-in-Chief. They only got one season. Oh. Gina Davis playing President of the United States. It's so badass. It was just ahead of its time. I don't think people were ready for it. And I want to call her up and be like, Gina, please go back and make more seasons, because it's so on point. It's so great. That cool. and the one that is still in play that is, I guess, would be a great, since that's not going to happen, is the Téa Leon, Madam Secretary. Is that what it's called?
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
It also just really good stuff, showing women in positions of power and just how we do it differently, how we lead differently and beautifully.
Are they both on Netflix, you said?
I'm not sure about the Téa Leon. Yeah, Netflix, Commander-in-Chief, the Gina Davis one is definitely on Netflix, and then the Téa Leon's Madam Secretary, which I think is what it's called, is active. Like, I think they're on hiatus right now, but they're going into their third season.
Oh, cool. I'm gonna watch the Madam President one.
Check it out.
Yeah, for sure. What about book? a book that you already mentioned a couple, but is there one that you really want to recommend to people other than your own and the ones that you mentioned?
Yeah, for sure. No, I would say, I'm reading A Woman's Worth, as I said, for the second time, and it's, I think, given your audience, that's, to me, it's essential. That's it's a fundamental read. In terms of our healing and our really remembering, because I think it really is about remembering. We're not discovering something new. We're finding our way back. We're remembering what we knew as little girls. We're remembering what we knew, generations before the patriarchy became the dominant force.
Yeah, I had lots of watershed moments reading that book, and I feel like I need to pick it up again myself. It was really, really impactful for me too. Wow. All right. I feel like I rang you out. I melted you for all that you're worth. I mean, this is amazing, but I could also talk to you for like 3 more days. So thank you so much for doing the podcast and taking so much time. I like you already know, I just think the world of you. So how do you feel? Is there anything, the name of this podcast is Let It Out. So is there anything that you still need to let out? Anything you wish that I would have asked you? Did you have fun?
Oh, gosh, I had so much fun. I can't believe the amount of territory we covered. That was just beautiful. You're just such a thoughtful host, interviewer. I mean, those were just such great, potent questions. I can't think of anything, I can't think of anything else, but we did it. And I'll be letting more out, because I'm constantly doing that, speaking and writing and hopefully there'll be other ways if people want to hear more. So
yes.
Awesome. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
This was so much fun. Our very tangential conversation. I wish that we would have gotten to linger in some topics and go deeper, but I felt like I was a bad host actually because I was so wanting to get in all the questions I wanted to ask you and I didn't know how much time I had. So you'll have to come back. But until then, tell everyone where they can find you, how they can support Real Girl. I really encourage people to donate to the philanthropy of Real Girl if they all feel called to help this organization. That means so much to me personally, and of course to Anea, and to get involved and just follow you guys. How can they do that?
So realgirlprograms.com is where there's all the information about Real Girl and various places that people can donate and get more information. Our Facebook page, the Real Girl Facebook page, my personal or my professional page, Anea Bogue, is more sort of women focused, so that's another place. And then also aneabogue.com, where there's always little blips about where I'm speaking or different things I've written or whatever. And I just love hearing from people. So you can also email me, anea@aneabogue.com, if there are questions or things that maybe you wanted to hear more about. I just love hearing from people when they're inspired or moved by something that I happen to have shared, and maybe we can dive deeper.
That was my conversation with Anea. I love her. Thank you so much for doing the show. I love Real Girl. Please check it out. Please support it. It means so much to me. I love that organization and this woman so much. I'm so glad that they came into my life. If you haven't listened to my conversation with Valerie yet, she's the reason why this happened. She is how I found out about Real Girl, how I met Anea, and that conversation was recorded about a year ago now. So be sure to listen to my conversation with Val if you haven't already. It's a great complement to this podcast. And subscribe to the show, leave a review, share it with a friend, and tweet at Anea and I. Tweet at Real Girl, tweet at me. Let us know what you thought of the episode. If you learned something, if it made you feel less alone, if it entertained you, let us know. All right, I love you guys. And I'm going to announce who's coming on the podcast next week in my newsletter. So sign up for my newsletter list, and I would say they go out every week, but they don't. They just go out when I'm inspired, which hopefully is every week, but you know what? I missed one this past week. But, they'll go out when they go out, and I think you guys are cool with that, because you guys are really cool, chill people, which I'm finding in the Facebook group, so where I'm getting to know a lot of you. So if you want to join the Facebook group, join the Facebook group. The link to do that is in the show notes. I love you guys. I said that already. And it's really late at night again, which is where I tend to record these. So if you're still listening to this, tweet at me your last thing you do before you go to bed at night? For me, I was going to say that's brush my teeth, but then I usually get in bed and lie there for a while, maybe look at my phone, probably listening to something on my phone as I close my eyes and fall asleep, which sounds really good right now, so I'm going to go do that. Love you guys. Bye.